Outlaws Legal Service: Why Some People Need a Driver's License. A lecture by George Gordon. Note: who is George Gordon? www.georgegordon.org/hois.htm. Learn more about George Gordon by visiting his website. www.georgegordon.org. Let me start off and explain to you why some people need a driver's license. There was a time when we didn't need one. When you didn't have one, and you were able to enjoy just driving along in your old car, your 1910 Peerlesser. Your 1910 Model T Ford. You didn't have or even need a driver's license. You were driving as a matter of right, exercising your liberty under the Constitution to go from point A to point B. Then somebody came along and said, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting or nifty or nice to? I call this the insurance scam. Somebody went to this insurance company. Let's say he was a salesman for the insurance company. He goes in. Naturally, all corporate business is interested in making money. He says, wouldn't it be nice to increase profits and cut costs? Let me make a suggestion. I'll tell you what we need. We need to insure all of these new horseless carriages. If we could insure all of these horseless carriages, boy, there would be a huge market there. I predict that we're going to move from horses and wagons to automobiles. And so the man goes out and he starts selling policies on horseless carriages and automobiles. But, the more of these horseless carriages and automobiles that pack the roads, then the more accidents, and more claims, right? So somewhere around, let's say, 1910, let's start out with them selling insurance policies in 1900 to people that have horseless carriages. By 1910 you go into the boardroom of the insurance company, and what do you see? Somebody is in there saying, how can we increase profits and cut costs? You know, answers someone else. I notice the biggest claims problems that we have are these automobiles that come to intersections and one of them doesn't stop or doesn't see the other one, and he goes into the intersection, and bang, there's a crash in the intersection. I think what we need is the stop sign law. If we had a law that put stop signs at these intersections, I think that we could cut down on those accidents, and that would cut down on the claims and losses at the insurance claims window, and that would cut our costs and increase our profits. Well, how are we going to affect that? Someone else asked. Oh, I know what we'll do. We'll go up to the legislature and we'll lobby these legislators up here, and we'll show them a bunch of real pictures of death and carnage. We'll show them pictures of arms that are cut off by people that went through the windshield in these accidents. And we'll lobby and we'll tell them that for the health, safety and welfare of the people, under the police powers, we need these stop signs. Pretty soon we've got stop sign laws. Now, that cuts down on accidents there. But, what else do you need? Well, about 1920, let's say, somebody comes in and they say, how can we increase profits and cut costs? So the insurance industry says, gosh, that's interesting. Let's see, what's the biggest single thing that costs us money? Well, these automobiles drive awful fast. So we need some traffic regulation. We've got to have a line down the middle of the road, and we've got to have speed limits, and we've got to have signs that show us curves, and we're going to call these traffic regulations. Oh, how do we get those passed? Well, we'll go to the legislature and we'll show them a lot of pictures of death and destruction and carnage on the highway. And we'll do it in the name of the people to protect the people's health, safety and welfare under the police powers. Oh, and we're doing it with the noblest of intentions. So now you go up to the legislature. This is the insurance industry. They show them the pictures and they have the public hearings and go through all the processes and pass these laws called regulations. Nobody objects too much to that, and so pretty soon, somebody comes along and says, how can we increase profits and cut costs? Well, we noticed that people between the ages of 15 and 25 have the most accidents, some of the highest rates of claims. So what we need is a system where we can keep records on these drivers. What we'll do is we'll propose a licensing law. And we'll claim that people that aren't licensed are a menace on the road, and that what we need is the licensing to establish qualifications for competency. Who's going to argue about that? You don't want incompetent drivers out there on the road, do you? So, we pass the licensing law at some point in time and then we start to keep records. What we'll do to get people to go down and get these licenses is, we'll lower insurance rates to licensed drivers and raise insurance rates to unlicensed drivers. Well, 10 years goes by and we come up to 1930, let's say, or something like that, and now we've got this uniform licensing law border to border, coast to coast. Now what we need to do is we've got to have stricter enforcement of the traffic regulations. So what we need to do is codify these, and call them misdemeanors, and we've got to dish out some punishment for these traffic offenders who are killing people by speeding and drunk driving and doing these violations of law. So we'll codify those. Here again is your insurance industry going into the legislature and they go through the hearings. They never do this in the name of profit to protect the claims window of the insurance industry. They always do this in the name of health, safety and welfare of the people under the police powers. We're doing this to protect you, Mr. John Q. Public, from those drunk drivers out there. Those wicked, evil, terrible, awful people. So, somebody in the insurance industry asks, how do we increase profits and cut costs? The next step is, now that we've got everybody licensed, what we need next is a mandatory insurance law. The reason we need a mandatory insurance law is that there are these irresponsible people out there, and they drive their cars, and they run into people, and then they don't have any insurance, and they can't pay the medical bills, and they can't pay the hospital, and they can't pay for the damages they cause. So what we need is a universal insurance program. So what we're going to do is pass a law, and we'll put this in the traffic code. Now let's take it a step further. Say about 1950 or 1960 somebody says, well, how do we increase profits and cut costs? What we need to do is educate our youth. We need to take traffic safety into the public schools and have a driver's education program. We've got to get to these young people and teach them how to get a driver's license, how to register their car, how to get insurance. In other words, we've got to train these young people to be slaves when they are age 14. And so you license the kid when he's 14, 15, or 16. You make the requirement to graduate from high school that they have this driver education, this driver training. He gets out of school, you've never taught him anything about the Constitution. You never taught him anything about rights versus privilege. So what we've got now is the perfect slave. He's created and designed by his government to be a perfect taxpayer. Now, if he violates or breaks any rules or regulations, what happens? Oh, you take him into the traffic court and they fine him under a penal statute. Under a contractual penalty for violating the terms and conditions of the contract. Now, on our streets and highways today, we have a virtual police state tyranny. That's a fact. The police stop you. They can search your car. They don't need any Fourth Amendment warrant whatsoever. They can arrest you and throw you in jail for drunk driving, and then you can worry about how you're going to prove that you weren't drunk, whether you were or not. And listen, I can categorize and tell you some of the most tear-jerking horror stories about people who've been entrapped, and charged with felonies, and thrown in the penitentiary. Now, did they hurt anybody? No, nobody was damaged. Nobody was hurt. But here they are in prison for drunk driving, maybe the second or third time, and the guy has never had an accident. And, I'm going to talk to you about that in a moment, and show you how that works. The traffic court's sole function and purpose is to protect the profitability of the insurance industry. It isn't there for any other purpose. Now the professed goals are always altruistic and magnanimous, and of course, we don't want people killed on the roads. And so we've got this big kick now that we're going to put all these drunk drivers in prison, and I've got to lay this story on you, Because when it comes to logic, reason and common sense, sometimes what I hear up here in my legislature just befuddles me. Here are some statistics I heard up here in the legislature. I went up there, and here in Idaho, they're going to pass this strict drunk driving law. The second time you're caught drunk driving. I mean, you don't have to kill anybody, get in an accident or anything, just go get a few drinks. And you and drive down the road, the policeman stops you, gives you a ticket, you plead guilty, pay a $300 fine, come back. Let it happen again and they're going to charge you with a felony. That's what they are proposing. Here's what some of the testimony was about. This one lady get up and she says, "Now listen, there were 52,000 killed last year, and 26,000 of those deaths were alcohol related. We've just got to do something about these drunk drivers because I'm telling you they are just killing people, there's just carnage on the road, and we've just got to do something about these lethal weapons called automobiles driving down the roads with these drunks in them and these alcoholics and these mean, wicked and terrible people." So I listened to all that. I listened to 18 people testify in 2 hours and a half, and every one of those people had a financial interest in alcoholism. There were nonprofit corporations that did alcohol and drug evaluations. There was the Attorney General, who is part of the law enforcement growth industry. He has about 50 prosecutors who prosecute drunk drivers. Then there's the prison out here. They've got to warehouse these criminals and they've got beds to fill so that they've got guards to employ to guard those people out there. There's the insurance industry, of course. And the medical industry is interested in these drunk drivers also. They make money off of alcohol evaluation. Then there are these alcohol clinics where you go in and dry out. Not one drunk came in to testify. Not one. I am sitting there just watching all this, and I think to myself, 26,000. I sat there for a little bit, and my mind works differently from bureaucrats. It works differently from politicians. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, let me see if I understand this. For some reason we've got to pass legislation and call drunkenness a felony. Now, we're going to lock this guy up in prison for 5 years, that's right. A felony is 5 years in jail. Do you know what it costs to put a man in prison for 5 years? In Idaho, $15,000 a year. Let's see how much that is. 15, 30, 45, 60, $75,000. My God, do you understand how much money that is? You've got this drunk out here and some of these people are testifying that alcoholism is an illness, it's a disease. And we're going to put these sick people out here in the penitentiary for 5 years, for $75,000. I'm saying, wait a minute. I could send that guy to Harvard twice for that kind of money and turn him into a medical doctor. Or a lawyer, or something, for that kind of money. Look, if I've got a guy driving down the road drunk and I wanted to get him off the road, why don't? Instead of paying $75,000 to lock him in prison, why don't we give him $50,000 and tell him to go to Brazil? We'd save $25,000 and we'd get rid of the guy. We'd make money, and he'd be happier down there. He'd have $50,000 to blow. He could practically retire. Okay, we've got to have law and order, and we've got to get these drunks off the roads, so we've got 26,000 of them alcohol related. I sitting there, and I'm thinking, my father was killed in a head-on traffic crash in 1970. I'll tell you, I was really upset about that. This fellow crossed the center line of the road, about 4:30 in the afternoon, in broad daylight, trying to pass a truck, and he didn't have enough clearance, and he ran right into my father and he killed him. My father went right through the windshield and broke his neck and it killed him. And I'll tell you what really galls me, the guy was stone sober. Didn't even drink. It didn't help my dad any. It killed him. So why do I'm sitting in this meeting and I'm listening to this diatribe, and I'm saying to myself, wait a minute. What is it? 26,000 were alcohol-related. Well then 26,000 were not alcohol-related, are they? Why don't we fund a study for the 26,000 that are non-alcohol related and find out how many of the 26,000 drivers that were not drunk had blonde hair and blue eyes? And find out if there is a correlation between blonde hair and blue eyes and traffic accidents and death on the highway. It makes about that much sense to me. The one thing that was totally absent in all the testimony was how many of those deaths that were alcohol related were caused by the drunk. You know, there was a famous Supreme Court case came down in New Mexico about 10 years ago. This farmer was driving down the road in his old pickup, just bombed out of his mind. He was so drunk that he couldn't walk. That's probably why he was driving. He had a bottle of whiskey about 2/3 empty in the truck bed toolbox, and he's driving down the road and there's an accident, a head-on crash. A doctor, his wife and his 2 children, from Houston, Texas, who were going on holiday to Los Angeles were killed. The farmer survived. That's the way it usually happens. The drunk survives and this wonderful family, this man and his wife and his 2 children were killed. The problem here was that the doctor fell asleep, crossed the center line, and hit the farmer head-on. Now let me ask you, is that wreck, and are those deaths, alcohol-related? Oh yeah, you bet. The farmer's drunk. But is the farmer the cause of the accident, or is the farmer who was drunk the victim? What none of these people tell you is, who has ever funded a study to find out whether or not drunkenness is the cause of the accidents that cost these lives? They'll cite you a few cases where the guy is drunk, ran the red light, ran into this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 20-year-old young woman just out of college, or whatever, and ruined her life, and how, we've gotta do something about this guy because it's the 5th time. Maybe so, but that's 1 out of 26,000. There's still 25,999 that we've got to analyze. But for some reason we want to zero in on this one group over here. Why do we want to zero in on one group? To protect the claims window of the insurance industry. I don't care if you drive down the road drunk. My father never took a sober breath for the last 20 years of his life, and he never had an accident drunk. He had several wrecks sober and never had a wreck drunk. Now I'm not sitting here telling you that you should drive drunk. I don't know whether you should or not. I'm just telling you that I'm suspicious when I see people who testify before the legislature trying to get some kind of legislation passed, and they're sitting there railing against some particular group of people that have this or that particular financial motivation involved. Listen, if you're running a nonprofit organization in Idaho, and it's to rehabilitate alcoholics, these people work for these organizations. While the organization is tax exempt, the people who run them get their salaries and make their livings doing that, don't they? Well, if they are getting their salaries and making their living doing that, then they have a financial interest involved, don't they? John Q. Public, the average drunk, he doesn't make any money off of it, so he doesn't go up a testify. Oh, now I see how that goes. Let's carry this on a step further. The purpose for having driver's licenses is to regiment all the people into a little group that can be regulated under the police powers, separate from their constitutional rights. Like I said, I'm not really concerned about you driving drunk. I've only got a 50% chance of being killed if you're drunk. I still stand the same 50% chance of getting killed if you are sober. And I'm just as dead whether you are drunk or sober. It doesn't make any difference whether a drunk kills me or a sober guy kills me. What you're going is creating this police state environment, giving the police these broad new powers to set up roadblocks. I mean, these people are so off the wall when it comes to our constitutional guarantees. They're so emotionally involved in their religious philosophy, or their moral philosophy, whatever it is, that they want to set up roadblocks to run all these drunks off the road. I'll bet you there are more people that drink in this country than don't drink. If all of your people out there that drink don't want to be involved in this massive police state Gestapo type society where we're just going to create this communist one world government right here in our own land, for the sole purpose of eradicating drunks. Well, let's think about that for a minute. The insurance company probably has figured that if they could get rid of a certain number of drinking drivers, they may save a little money. I don't know who came in, but somebody came into the boardroom and said, "I'll tell you, these drunks over here are costing us a lot of money at the claims window. What we need to do is do something about them." So the president and a few of them get out there and they start beating the tom-toms, and then they start going to the legislature and they start getting these laws passed. Now, personally, I don't really care. I don't have a driver's license. I don't come under Title 49, so I don't have to be concerned about it, but let me tell you that you licensed people out there better get real concerned about it. If I'm concerned about you with your $100 car running into my $30,000 Porsche, I don't need any legislation to protect me from you. If I'm real concerned about it, it is up to me to go out and insure my $30,000 Porsche against irresponsible people who do not have insurance, who are poor and cannot pay for my $30,000 Porsche. And if you are the poor guy, and you've got the $100 car, are you really concerned about my $30,000 Porsche crashing into your 62 Buick Skylark and wrecking it? You just go out, pay another $100 and buy another car, right? You're not real concerned about it. Besides that, if I've got a $30,000 Porsche and the wrecks my fault, I probably have $100 and I can pay you, right? I don't where this logic of theirs comes from, but we citizens don't go out buying insurance policies for other people, or compelling them to buy insurance policies, for fear that when they die they might leave their family on welfare, do they? If the government can compel you to buy an insurance policy, can't they compel you to buy a water bed, or compel you to buy a certain type of carpet, or compel you to buy a TV set? The government cannot compel you into a contract against your will and over your objection, pursuant to Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. Well, how do that? Do that by statute under Title 49 in the Traffic Code. That's easy. You volunteered to do that. You've got a driver's license in your pocket. How can the government come in and tell you that you've got to get a permit, and that you've got to build your house in a certain way by a certain method? That it's going to be inspected, and you're going to be regulated, and that if you don't do that you are a criminal and they're going to put you in jail? I don't know. A fellow went to jail for 5 days for building his own house without a building permit. Was there ever a time in America when you could go out and build something on your own property and you didn't need your government's permission? Yeah, there was. It was when the citizens were responsible for their actions, and not someone else. When you were ready to become responsible for your own actions, then you can be free. Because incompetent people are not responsible for their own actions, are they? An incompetent person has a guardian, doesn't he? Don't your children at 10 years old have a guardian? Don't you tell your kid that he'll come in at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and if he doesn't, there is a penalty here called a belt which will be applied until he can get